We're out, on safari, sort of specifically looking for bears twice a day, but then we'll do another activity. One of my favourite ones is that we take people for a walk through the forest. All of our guides are biologists, so they're all really great at, helping people to see what's in the ecosystem, see and feel it. So we'd be walking people through there and sort of having people understand the larger picture too, how the salmon come from the ocean up into this forest, and then the bears take the salmon.
Welcome to Into the Hearts of Canada, the podcast where we share the stories of extraordinary people transforming Canadian tourism. I'm your host, Matt Leedham, checking in from Byron Bay on Bunjalung Country, Australia's most easterly point. Our journey today takes us to British Columbia's Great Bear Rainforest on Vancouver Island, an ecosystem home to ancient trees, wild salmon, and lots of grizzly bears. Marg Leehane, co-owner of Great Bear Lodge, is helping travellers experience this wilderness wonder responsibly. Originally from Melbourne, Marg co-created an off-grid floating lodge that has become a model of conservation tourism. Her story shows how travel can protect fragile places while creating life-changing encounters for those who visit. Well, good morning, Marg, and thank you so much for joining us today on Into the Hearts of Canada, our podcast series. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. First question, where are you joining us from today on the podcast?
Well, I'm calling in from Campbell River on Vancouver Island, so that's just a little bit south of where our tours leave from Port Hardy on Vancouver Island.
Fantastic. And your season over there runs from May to October, so you're kind of halfway through it now. How's the season panning out for you so far?
The season is going great. I mean, we're getting lots of guests, which is really fun. But the thing that always gets me excited is the bears. One of our favourite bears showed up this year with 2 new cubs, and we've just been spending a lot of time with them. There's nothing cooler than sitting in a boat and watching 2 cubs play. So in terms of the season so far, I mean, that's definitely been my highlight.
Yeah, just from the research I've done on what looks like an absolutely phenomenal place, there's so much diversity within that season, isn't there?
Yeah, and we're really lucky that we get a 6-month season because not everyone does. They focus on different seasons. But, the bears come out of hibernation in spring and then they head down to the estuary. They're eating sedge, which is kind of like grass. But it's also breeding season. So we get big males and we don't necessarily see big males at other time of the year. So you get all this interesting behaviour. You've got the males who are trying to, advertise their presence to people. So they're stomp trails and rubbing on trees. And so that's what we saw in spring. And in summer, they're sort of eating more berries and clams. Things get a little bit more relaxed, but right now there's kind of this expectant feeling in the air because the salmon have just started showing up in the river, and it'll be a little while before the bears can catch them. But, by early September, the salmon run will be in full force, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it just looks incredible. Now, you're way up there in Vancouver Island, way up in the northeastern tip, going that way.
Yeah, exactly. So the tours leave from Port Hardy, but we actually fly people by seaplane back over to the mainland coast. So in that area of the mainland coast of British Columbia, there's no roads, no road access. It's really, truly wild and remote country. So it takes about half an hour to fly people from Port Hardy out there and land on the water there, and the lodge is floating just in this really remote inlet.
And it's a beautiful old seaplane that flies you over there as well, isn't it? Which, of course, is a magical part of the journey as well.
Yeah, there are. There are a couple of different planes that we use. One of them is that de Havilland Beaver. They call it the workhorse of the north because it's opened up this country to a large degree. But the plane we use a lot is called a Grumman Goose. And for anyone who loves flying, I think it's amazing. They'll build in the 30s and 40s. Fortunately, they've had a lot of maintenance since then. They're all still flying well, but they land right on their belly. They're like an old seaplane that doesn't land on skids. It lands on its belly. So it's a pretty amazing experience just to be in that plane.
Thinking about the Great Bear Rainforest, we're talking about an absolutely humongous stretch of rainforest itself, 8 million acres, twice the size of Africa's Serengeti. What makes it such a rare and special place?
Well, it's the largest remaining coastal temperate rainforest in the world. There used to be a lot more coastal temperate rainforests, say down in New Zealand, South America, places like that, but this is the largest remaining tract. And it's truly wild. You know, you've got these fjords that carve up into it. There's these gigantic, conifer trees just lining those fjords. And then you have this really amazing wildlife. You have the bears and the wolves and the whales come up there. It's just such a remote, rugged place that makes it amazing.
Mm. And not surprisingly, of course, it's completely off-grid, so very sustainable in that regard in terms of how the whole the lodge operates. What's life like living and working there in such a remote place?
Well, I can tell you I enjoy it a lot more when the guests are there for those 6 months rather than I lived out there for 10 winters. It's a pretty remote place to live, but I decided that I liked people. So now I don't live out there in winters. We have caretakers. But yeah, I mean, it's a floating building. So we actually have 6 buildings, a nice big lodge for the guests. They're all floating on the water and there's a ramp to land. And what I think is really unusual about it is, you know, you can take your cup of tea out in the morning and just sit there and there's otters that swim past and seals. And
Wow.
sometimes the seals come up onto the dock, and we had a humpback whale there 2 days ago that was pretty close. So to me, that's, you know, what makes it really interesting too, is just being floating.
Yeah, and obviously the grizzlies are the main draw card that everyone is really coming for, but there's so much other wildlife, so much diversity there, as you say.
Yeah, there is a lot of diversity. And you know what I find is interesting is that people come for the bears, but really what that place gives them is a chance to slow down. Like there's literally no other people there. We're the only operator in the entire fjord. It's so remote. And we don't offer Wi-Fi. So people, you know, when they get out there, they put their phone down, and then, you know, it takes them about the first night, and you can just see their heart rate comes down, they slow down, and they connect with the people around them, because you don't go have an amazing experience and come back and try to upload it to social media. You got no other choice but to grab a glass of wine and sit down and talk to people about it. So I think people do come for the bears, but what I really love about it is it lets people really decompress and really reconnect to nature.
Yeah, and I guess that's a part of the journey that they probably hadn't really considered, is that connection piece, even with other people as well, and sharing that amazing, you know, just everything that's going on around them.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny that like every group says, our group is gelled so well, we all get along so well together. And we unusual, and I'm like, yes, but kind of everyone does this.
Yeah, massive part of the adventure.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about what happens on the actual grizzly bear viewing tours.
Yeah, so in spring and summer, when the bears are mostly on the estuary, they're moving around a fair bit. So we need to be able to move around with them. So we're viewing from small boats at that time. So we're out in these little skiffs. We have 5 passengers per skiff. And we're really just in these little tidal sloughs. And it's kind of like being on a safari, but being on an adventure, because you're wending your way through this complex ecosystem looking for the bears, but you're also experiencing the birds and the flowers and all sorts of other great stuff. And then when we find a bear, you know, we'll shut the motor off and then we'll just spend time with them. We limit it to 10 people in spring and summer, because 10 people is 2 boats. And what we've found is if we put a 3rd boat in there, the bears don't like it. And so we are really, we're in their home. We can go elsewhere. They can't. So we're just very sensitive to not wanting to push them out of their, you know, prime habitat. So that's why we cap it at 10. But then in autumn, when the salmon come in, the activity for the bears moves up the river. And at that point, we're viewing from platforms. So we have 5 different platforms. They're built in front of really good fishing spots, and then we'll go to whichever platform we think is going to have the best activity that day. So through spring, summer and autumn, you're out on 2 safaris a day. You go out sort of in the morning and then late afternoon, early evening, because that's when the bears tend to be most active. And then in the middle of the day, we'll do some sort of other activity like an interpretive walk or something.
And how do the bears kind of respond to you being there? What's their sort of reaction?
Well, it depends on the bear.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's highly dependent upon the bear. I mean, certainly in the first year that we got there, the reaction that we saw from most bears was fear, and, you know, they would draw away. It was the young females first who started to stick around a bit more, because what they found, and this is common across all bear viewing areas, is that the larger males don't tend to like humans, and so they won't be around when the humans are around. So the young females figure this out and start to use the humans as security. And then over time, more bears are like, well, I've had 5 neutral experiences with those humans. I don't think they're going to kill me, so I can just relax. And then they do start using us a bit more as security. And then, of course, they're starting to teach their cubs that. So the mum that I mentioned, dear Bleater, and her 2 cubs that came out there this year, it was her mum, Roxanne, that we first started experiencing. So now we're into the 3rd generation of that family. So obviously they're pretty relaxed around us because, they've known us since they were cubs.
Yeah, fascinating. Yes, one thing we haven't mentioned so far is that you don't really have a Canadian accent. And that's probably because you're actually from Melbourne. But your journey is a fascinating one in terms of how you ended up at Great Bear Lodge. So I believe you started in software development in Melbourne. So this was 25 years ago. What inspired you to make the move to somewhere like that?
Well, I think it's great that you said that was 25 years ago because it was a little bit longer.
Was it?
Yeah, so grew up in Melbourne and, all my family still lived there. And I did software development as an and worked 10 years in that field. But I really only did it so that I could travel. If you're a developer, you can live anywhere in the world and get easy visas. And then after 10 years, I just thought, I was in Silicon Valley and I'm like, what am I doing in corporate America? So I thought, let me just step outside my career for a year, just go and have some adventure and then I'll come back to it. And then, and that was 25 years ago.
Wow. Did people think you were crazy?
After I'd been doing this for about 2 years, I had to sit my dad down and say, I really love this. I think it's what I was meant to do. There's only one thing I find stressful about it, and that's you. So stop telling me that I'm throwing away my degree and I'm throwing away my professional experience. And then I think he didn't truly believe that it was a career path until he saw me on Australian TV. And then he's like, oh, okay, I get it. You're in a real job. It's okay.
If you made it onto Australian TV, you've really done it.
That's right.
What was the transition like in those early years, going from where you'd been living and the kind of life you had to suddenly being exposed to a completely different experience on a daily basis?
Yeah, like I moved up from San Francisco, and the very first time I got in a water taxi and went up one of these fjords, I just thought, I'm in a National Geographic documentary. This is amazing. Australia is beautiful and diverse, but I had never experienced anything like this before. It's so rugged and wild, the fjords, the mountains, the wildlife, and I couldn't believe that I was getting the opportunity. I mean, I was volunteering for Great Bear at that point and working for free, and that's back when we were just a tiny company doing day trips. So, but it was such an adventure. I just couldn't believe how lucky I was to be doing it.
So how many years exactly is it now then, Marg? If it's not 25.
Well, it is 25 with Great Bear, but
Okay,
it was 35 since I finished my degree.
Wow, gosh, yeah. Well, look, 25 at Great Bear is a massive amount of time, 2.5 decades. I mean, you must have seen so much change. You mentioned before the early days when it was day tours. What does your vision sort of look like now in terms of for the lodge and thinking about responsible nature tourism? What should that look like for Canada? What's your sort of vision on how that can be?
Well, I must say that I think that all the wildlife tourism experiences I know of in Canada are very responsible. The whale watching in BC, it's very responsible. The bear viewing, we have an association where all of our guides have to go through a training program. So I think Canadians do it pretty well in terms of, I think there's just such a deep respect for the wildlife here. I don't think people think of exploiting it and pushing animals around in their habitat for profit. That's not what I see here. And I think there's just a ton of science being done around whales in particular, and every time they learn something new about what their population is or how they react to certain stimuli, then that gets incorporated into the wildlife viewing regulations. So I actually think that Canada does a pretty good job.
Yes, I would certainly say so myself too. And I'm thinking about your mission for Great Bear Lodge. What does that look like in terms of the future?
Well, I think, we certainly don't want to get any bigger. We take 10 people in spring and summer, and we take 18 people in autumn. And we've always just tried to create the kind of experience that we would want to have. So we don't
Mm,
want to grow, because this is the kind of experience that we would want to have if we're tourists. And we don't want to be adding more people if it impacts the bears. I don't want to, create another bear viewing location, because then I'll become a manager. And, right now I still get to guide a fair bit, which is pretty darn amazing.
yeah.
I do, like, we're always, pushing forward with, sustainability. Like, we're working ever more closely with the Gwasl and Akwada, who are the First Nation on whose territory we operate. Now all of our tours are packaged with the night at their hotel in Port Hardy.
Yep.
And we host their elders, we host their council to come out. It's a privilege to have
Mm,
a facility in their traditional territory that they can actually come out and use, which is really nice. We just gave away a trip to the lodge to, there's a local Indigenous youth soccer tournament, and the prize was coming out there, which is just something that they couldn't imagine, having that kind of
yeah.
experience. So there's that side of it. But both my business partner, Tom, and I are just very, being good environmental stewards. So right from the get-go, it was all as much solar power as we could do, as much, hydroelectricity. We just upgraded our hydroelectricity this year and put all new lithium batteries in. And, it just makes sense when you're out in the wilderness. You don't
Mm,
want to have a barge coming in with fuel any more than you have to. So if you can make those kind of investments and you don't have a generator running,
yeah.
it makes you feel good about it.
And are you finding that travellers are responding to that kind of story a lot more too, in terms of the off-grid piece? And maybe it's not quite the sexy piece on the itinerary that you might want to sell, but it feels like it's becoming equally important for travellers in terms of their decision-making about where they're actually going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I've been waiting for years for it to become even more important, because I've been an environmentalist my whole life. Yeah, I
Mm,
think people definitely are. We're getting a lot more questions like, well, how does this run? And how do you,
mm,
deal with your recycling? I think it's great that people are doing
yeah,
that, because if you're not respecting, if you're not being a great steward of the natural area in which you operate, you shouldn't be there.
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And thinking about the guests themselves, just beyond that, how do they typically describe their sort of encounters with the bears in the forest? How life-changing is it for people to experience what they see?
Well, it's not unusual when we have a great encounter for people to cry,
Mm,
which is amazing. People will cry when they're getting on the plane, when they're leaving, which is also, so satisfying as someone who's trying to create that experience. Some of the bears are pretty comfortable with us, and sometimes we're lucky to have close experiences. And people just can't even imagine that they could be that close to a grizzly bear who everyone's supposed to fear, and they're fearsome and all those sorts of things. But you're just sitting there floating on the water, not so far away from them, just listening to them, chewing sedge grass. And then
mm,
this mum deer bleeder has been feeding her cubs a lot out in the open this year, which means she's feeling completely comfortable. So just like being close to that, like, I think
yeah,
people are amazed that you can have that experience, and it can be quiet. It's an immersive
yeah,
experience. Yeah.
yeah. So quite meditative almost. It's sort of just sitting and watching and just observing, really.
Yeah, yeah. And that too comes with people's heart rate slowing down. So they
Yeah,
really can, instead of like, I've got to get a photo so I can take it
yeah.
home. It's like they just, one of my favorite things to do is I take people upriver and then shut off the motor, and then we just drift down for about 30 minutes. And the boat always
Mm,
goes completely silent, and all
mm,
we can hear are the birds, and people are just like, you can see their ears opening up, like they're just really tuned into the forest. And I love being able to create that experience for people.
yeah, wow, so magic. Now, just thinking about the ecosystem there, and I mean, we always get this, this divergence with tourism coming in and the ecosystem. What role do you think the lodge plays in the whole ecotourism piece of
Yeah,
the environment there?
I think the major impact, obviously, we could have is on the bears.
Mm,
And so we've developed our management plan. Some bears just don't ever want to be around humans, and you've got to allow those bears access to the high quality areas. So we do the same thing at the same time every day, so that the bears can learn that. And then the bears who don't want to be around us can be there when we're not there. And there's also large parts of the valley that we don't go into, even though we know they're really beautiful and have great bear activity, because we want those areas to be safe places for the bears to go to if they don't want to encounter us. So I think that's the biggest thing. And, the flip side of that is that, by being predictable, some of the less dominant bears can figure out, you know what, I actually have the confidence to go fishing on the salmon river when the humans are there, because I don't think the big guys are going to be around. So it's just, it's an evolution over time. Their behaviors are changing around us. And yeah, it's just super fun to watch.
Take me there now is all I can say. I must say I watched quite a few videos. I know you've done a lot with media, as you mentioned. You've become a household name already in Australia. And yeah, absolutely, it's just mind blowing. Like, it really is. It just looks absolutely incredible. And I can see now, I think it was National Geographic Adventure that rated you one of the best adventure travel companies on earth, which is a pretty good rap.
I know, and what a privilege, because we're really pretty small. So it was just like, oh, someone noticed. That's lovely.
Absolutely. And is there a story of sort of transformation that you can think about from one of your guests, how they arrived and then how they left at the end of the trip?
Yeah. I mean, an obvious one I can think of is we had a guest come in from LA, and he was originally from New York, and very much he was a businessman.
Yeah,
that's all I need to say. So he was there, and he was on a schedule, and he wanted to get the photo on leave, and he just felt very New York. And then over the course of that first trip, he started slowing down and started connecting, started having some amazing experiences with the bears. And he's like, oh, maybe I'll get a little bit more serious about this photography thing. So he left from the trip and then sort of took up wildlife photography.
Wow.
Yeah, and then he retired, and his entire life now is built around taking people he loves to amazing places in the world to photograph animals. And he's been up to visit us 7 times.
Yeah.
And I think every time he's just a little bit more relaxed.
No, that is a true story of transformation, isn't it? If you think about his photographs, I'm sure, and the amount of people that would now see them as well, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's right. We had another couple from the World Bank in DC who wrote to us afterwards and said they changed their entire life based around the feeling that they felt when they were out there. They're like, why are we living in this rushed way? What are we trying to accomplish in this life? We need to slow down. We need to figure out what our true priorities are. And they told me they completely changed their lives after that.
Oh, that's incredible. Life-changing gets bandied around a lot, but this really is life-changing stuff, isn't it? We've got a lot of travel professionals listening to this podcast and thinking about sending people over to come and experience Great Bear Lodge. What sort of storytelling do you think that they can build into how they communicate the experience of what they're going to see? Anything in particular that comes to mind there?
One thing I love is when, agents from Australia and New Zealand build those great itineraries that give people the sort of big, majestic parts of Canada, but then they also include an experience like ours to get down right at that intimate level with nature there. So, it's wonderful to be on a cruise and see the glaciers and go to the Rockies, and it's so dramatic and big. But then you come down to sitting in a boat with 5 people and, listening to the bear, talk to its cub kind of thing. So I think I really love it when people sort of build in that diversity in the experience. And I just think it's just, being so far off grid and just really being able to relax. That's an amazing thing in this, age.
Yeah. And I mean, you've touched in terms of who, the kind of travelers that would be interested. I mean, you've touched on a few people already, maybe not the people you were thinking. We're talking about the businessman from New York who possibly hadn't even considered it. Maybe, someone else booked the trip for him. Who knows? Yeah. Obviously it's a bit more of a premium product, but it's really for anyone, is it, in terms of who would come?
Well, I would say about half of our guests are nature enthusiasts who are, I went to Africa on a safari, I'm going to Antarctica, and the other half are like, oh, I'm coming to Canada, I might as well see a bear. So, and, I certainly think that, or hope that our hospitality, we have a chef on staff and she's amazing. And I think it's the whole package, right?
It's the whole package, yeah.
It's the beer and wine is included. And, we really want people to feel like they're coming out to join a family. And
yes.
They get welcomed like they're being welcomed into our family. So I think it's the whole thing. I also think that travel in rural and remote areas, when I travel, that's when I have the most meaningful connections with people. That's when
Mm.
you're connecting with real locals who, had such hospitality. And so I kind of figure that, coming to Port Hardy and coming out and experiencing our lodge, you kind of get those experiences as well.
Mm. And going back to the seasons, is there a best time to come?
Yeah, so certainly we see the highest number of bears in autumn when the salmon are in, just because it's such a high value food source for them. So that's when we see our highest numbers. It tends to be when we see our most cubs, eagles, all those sorts of things. So that's certainly a really popular time. People
Mm.
book quite far in advance for that. My personal favorite time is spring. So you don't see as many bears. It's spring, so it's beautiful birds and flowers and all those sorts of great things, but you see all the interesting behaviors around breeding. So you see the big
Mm.
males, you see those
Yeah.
really subtle interactions between the bears that, the guides can really help explain. Oh my goodness, that was amazing. That sideways stance meant this. And so that's my favorite time to go. And that's kind of the second highest number for sightings. Summer's a little bit quieter for sightings. So that's probably the lowest season for sightings.
Yeah. And going beyond just the grizzly spotting on boats, you offer other kind of experiences. Can you give us a bit of a sense of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we're out, on safari, sort of specifically looking for bears twice a day, but then, we'll do another activity every day. So, one of my favorite ones is that we take people for a walk through the forest.
Mm.
All of our guides are biologists, so they're
Yep.
all really great at sort of, helping people to see what's in the ecosystem, see and feel it. So we'd be walking people through there and sort of having people understand the larger picture too, how the salmon come from the ocean up into this forest, and then the bears take the salmon up into the forest, and then the trees grow bigger because they've got the
Mm.
salmon left over there. So I love watching people make those connections when they understand how that whole ecosystem works. So the hike is one of my favorites. Another one we do is we take people up to see really cool bear marking areas. And one of the really cool features we have up there that's pretty unusual is a bear wallow. So it's literally a mud hole that
Hmm.
male bears go into in spring. So it's some sort of scent marking thing for the males during breeding season.
Uh,
And so they get in there, they roll around, they pee in there, they get out
mm.
and they do these stomp tracks with their paws. It's only males and it's only spring. So it's not, because I know I would want to get in there as a female, but that's a pretty unusual thing. So we love taking people up to show them that. We don't necessarily see bears in there, but we've got trail cameras that are up on it. So then we can take them back
Mm.
to the lodge and show them the footage we've captured from there.
Wow. Yeah. Gosh, what a different insight into the, as you say, the whole picture.
Yeah.
Goodness, it sounds like you may. You might need something over your nose, though, by the sounds of things. It sounds a bit pongy in those. Oh, well, my next question was going to be, what's something you wish more people knew about the Great Bear Rainforest? Maybe that was it.
There's so many. Well, one super cool thing that's happening in this ecosystem right now is a real resurgence of humpback whales. So
Mm.
when I first moved up here 25 years ago, it was rare to see a humpback. And now there are tons of humpbacks. Like when
Yeah,
you
well,
do a whale watching tour on northern Vancouver Island now, you're still seeing killer whales, which is what people like to go out for, but there are so many humpbacks. I was out on the water today and saw 4 humpbacks. It's just such a wonderful thing when you're in an
mm,
ecosystem where something is becoming more abundant.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, the lodge is on salt water, isn't it? It's not fresh water there, which
That's
is,
right.
again, perhaps people are maybe thinking it is. So you have got it's an incredible range of marine life, especially.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's how the salmon get up there, of course.
Of course, of course. And looking ahead, what does the future look like for Great Bear Lodge and sort of nature-based tourism, do you think, in British Columbia?
Well, I think nature-based tourism is, I think more products are being added to go out
Mm.
and I love the city. Cities are great, but can I also go out and show me what your nature is? So I'm seeing on Northern Vancouver Island, I'm seeing some folks are now starting to offer wolf tours where people can go out and try to find, there's a couple of packs of wolves close to Port Hardy that are pretty consistent. So I definitely think that there's some new products are being added. Gosh, it's a pretty mature industry in a good way. They do it really responsibly. More and more First Nations operators are coming online and working with them to just make it the sort of really authentic but also responsible experience that everyone enjoys.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, from your perspective, how do you see your role evolving at Great Bear Lodge in terms of being a steward for the place, really?
Well, I mean, something fun that we did this year is last month we brought out 17 of the best bear researchers and bear managers in North America out to the lodge to have like an informal symposium. The idea was we'll drink whiskey at night and talk about the cool things about bears instead of going to a conference and talking about statistics. And so for that, we flew in 5 of our ex-guides and had all our current guides there, and we were just all flies on the wall. It was amazing to listen to these researchers, things that as bear guides we've said and just taken for truth, and have the people who are at the forefront of research saying, that thing we've always said, I don't think it's true. Do you guys think it's true? And, the other researchers saying, no, well, let's do some research. So that was amazing. So I think we really love being sort of right at the forefront of science, both encouraging our guides and our ex-guides to really be at the forefront of what's going on with bear research. And we try to facilitate that as much as possible. One of our guides from that experience now thinks she's going to go do her PhD on that bear wallow.
Incredible.
And so, that's what I think we get super excited about, is the science.
Yeah, fantastic. And lastly, what message do you have for the travel industry here in Australia around protecting places like yourselves through tourism? Can be, come with really negative connotations, unfortunately. Obviously, what you're doing there is phenomenal. It's quite the opposite. How do you sort of, how do you get that message out there?
Well, I think the biggest thing would be to choose reputable operators. Everyone I've ever seen in a travel trade brochure in Australia is a responsible operator. So I think that's pretty important, those established operators. And then it's just also thinking about, does that mass experience where you have hundreds of people descending upon a habitat, what would that feel to you? If you're one of the animals in that habitat, how would it feel to you? So just thinking about it that way. And I think that really helps people to choose experiences that truly are benefiting the environment.
Yeah, well, that's a very beautiful way to end our conversation today, Marg. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. I am so excited now to start planning for a trip out to see you sometime soon, because it's just obviously a very, very special part of the world, and an absolute privilege to come and visit. But in the meantime, wishing you all the very best for the season ahead, and thank you again for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks, Matt. It's been a real pleasure. And, the more Aussies and Kiwis we have out there, it always makes me feel at home. So thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marg.
Thank you.
Marg's work in the Great Bear Rainforest shows how travel can give back more than it takes. Her story is a reminder that when we tread lightly and honour the places we visit, we help protect them for generations to come. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to check the show notes for useful links, downloads, and more information on today's episode. Whether you're a travel professional, a traveller, or simply a curious listener, you'll find resources to help you dive deeper into the hearts of Canada.